Well, good morning and welcome to a live Elevenses. I'm back with the live shows. It's Wednesday, the 11th of May. It's show number 237, if I've done my counting right. And I have a feeling I actually double counted a show. But anyway, what have I got for you today on what is actually a fairly grey day here in London at the moment? It was beautifully sunny when I looked out the window first thing at 7 o'clock, but it seems to have clouded over. We'll be looking at the government's proposed legalisation of e-scooters, which was announced in the Queen's speech a few days ago. A car has crashed through a Leicestershire dealer's front window. Riders were taken out by a crashing moto in the Giro d'Italia. FEMA are pushing for onboard vehicle data to come with robust privacy rules. And the Netherlands is getting a statutory 1-year warranty on used bikes. As for your helmet, ECE 2206 is fully replacing the ECE 2205 standard from July. We'll also be asking if Harley is about to reboot the Bronx. And finally, today's talking point, particularly pertinent one since it almost happened to me the other day. If a car turns right and it's hit by an overtaking motorcycle, whose fault is it? So settle yourselves down for the next 30 odd minutes and join me, Kevin Williams, here of Survival Skills Rider Training for Elevenses. Now, don't forget, if you have any comments, any questions, anything you want to ask, generally speaking, I will get back to you during the show if I possibly can, as this is a live one, or if I can't manage that, I will respond at the end of the show. So do drop me a comment if you've anything to ask. And Clive has already looked in and said good morning. Nice to see you again, Clive. All right, okay, so on with today's show. Now, the first story is that there's been a growth in electric step scooters. If I can get the picture up, there we go. The surge in their use during the pandemic actually has been quite remarkable, and they've become familiar sights in urban areas right across the world. Now, right now in the UK, it's only legal, of course, to ride one of these electric step scooters on public roads if they're part of a registered hire scheme. So that would be from a company like Voice, Spin, or Ginger. Now, you can legally buy e-scooters online or in high street stores for private use, but they are currently only legally ridden on private land. So that's the theory. In reality, of course, they're appearing everywhere. So I don't think that the announcement that the use of privately owned e-step scooters is to be legalized by the UK government was much of a surprise, particularly, of course, as a number of documented hints had been dropped in previous days. So the fact is, e-step scooters are here to stay. The lid is off the genie's bottle, well and truly, and there's no way we're going to turn that around to eliminate them from the roads. Now, you know, frankly, for short journeys, I'd say that they do provide a quick and questionably green way of getting around towns and cities. Okay, what do we know about the problems here? Well, there are some question marks. For the starters, there's the sourcing of rare earth metals used in the battery, and there's also the disposal and recycling of the battery. And of course, riding one does come with some definite risks. Now, the announcement to legalise their use was made during the Queen's speech, which was delivered by Prince Charles, and it comes despite a huge surge in the number of people being hospitalised as a result of e-step scooter accidents. Now, data was obtained via a Freedom of Information request, and it showed that compared with 2020, the number of ambulances dispatched to incidents involving e-step scooters was up by over 80% in 2021 to 713. And of those incidents, no less than 173 casualties were transported to A&E, which was actually up 40% over the same period in the previous year. Now, Transport Secretary Grant Shapps has confirmed that the new laws regulating the use of electric step scooters will be introduced during the 2022-2023 parliamentary session. So basically that means after the long summer holidays that our MPs take. On the plus side, failing to move to legalise them only restricts the use of sensible riders who are basically currently abiding by the rules, not using e-step scooters. Shaps actually said the government would then be able to stipulate that all e-scooters sold met certain standards concerning speed, power, and lights, amongst other things, in order to crack down on the illegal use on roads of non-compliant e-scooters. However, as was pointed out by the Transport Select Committee member Simon Jupp, there have been 900 collisions, 11 of which were fatal, during the ongoing e-scooter trials, which of course involve scooters which meet the government standards. So frankly, I can't see the legislation being aimed at the end user achieving much if we're focused on accidents. Now, just as we've seen with, of course, with CE approved bike kit, something I've been talking about for many years, but have covered fairly regularly over the last couple of years on Elevenses, there's little to prevent people buying non-certified clothing, because it's either cheaper that they're buying it or because they're unaware of the regulations. It doesn't stop people actually selling this stuff. So frankly, calls for an increase in efforts to raise awareness of the rules that regulate e-scooter use, such as age and having a driving license, which is one point that was made, seem to me to be very much missing the point. So look at e-cycles, for example. Now, there's currently a legal responsibility on the rider to comply with the laws regarding the use of those machines. And there have been rules about what constitutes a legal electrically assisted bicycle in place for years, but the number of illegal twist and go bikes, which are technically motorcycles, of course, and thus illegal for use on the roads, has ballooned. In fact, I even got an advert for one in my email this very morning. And I had a bit of a run-in with a rider of one of those on Friday night as he attempted to pass me. I was already filtering at some 20 miles an hour, and he tried to squeeze through the gap between me and an oncoming bus just as I was going past a bus on my near side. So the same applies with the thousands of illegal e-step scooters which are currently zipping around. There are plenty of riders happy to take a chance on riding them. Simply regulating the power output and design won't stop the sale of illegal ones. As one comment put it, the people that ride them dangerously will buy them and ride them regardless of the law. Now, predictably, pedestrian groups are already protesting, but as another person commented, we already have e-bikes whizzing around just as silently, so any argument that they're dangerous to pedestrians is moot unless you also want to ban cycling. Okay, fair enough, although e-step scooters, of course, do get ridden on the pavement, possibly rather more than e-bicycles do. If there is one benefit, however, I would suggest that it's possibly that people will treat them with a little bit more care and attention. Now, we have been I suspect, become fairly familiar to finding these things abandoned. And if people do own them, they are more likely to take them home or upstairs to the office rather than just drop them at the point they get off. The e-scooter trials have created, I wouldn't say streets are being littered with abandoned scooters, but they certainly do appear just left anywhere. They are supposed, of course, be returned to marked bays, but like the cycle schemes, many do end up simply dropped like this. And it's actually one of the biggest complaints from residents in the UK trial areas that these scooters are simply abandoned. It's also argued, of course, that people tend to take more care of personal possessions than they do something that they rent. And one argument is that with a rented scooter, the rider probably won't be making the best decisions when riding it because they don't really care what happens to the scooter. In fact, they might end up damaged as well. Doesn't seem to cross most people's minds. Trevor Sterling, chair of the Major Trauma Group, actually suggested it's only when all types of e-scooters are subject to the same rigorous standard of safety that we will see a reduction in preventable incidents and less strain on the NHS. Well, again, I'd say this is sort of a pie in the sky prediction. Given the number of cyclists I see zipping around London on badly maintained machines, I saw one with not just bald tyres the other day, but the canvas actually showing through, all riding at night with no lights. I'm far from convinced that private ownership will actually do much to drive up standards. But anyway, hey ho. But right now, I would say that the current ban is only holding back those who would consider consider riding one legally. But precisely who will have the legal right to use private e-scooters doesn't appear to have been addressed yet. Under the UK trial regulations, anyone riding an e-scooter in those trials must have a provisional or full UK driving licence and must be over the age of 18. Now, given that a 17-year-old can get behind the wheel of a car, potentially a Ferrari if you could afford the insurance, or ride a 125cc motorcycle, it does seem to be a bit of an unreasonable limitation. And arguably, it would be far better to bring riding these things into line with provisional moped licenses, i.e. you can get one from the age of 16. And that would also serve in a way to bring e-step scooters into the PTW fold. But it does actually open up a raft of other also unanswered questions. For example, whether there should be mandatory insurance requirements, whether there should be some kind of registration or identifiable number plate on the rear, something that has been used in some countries, whether riders should have training before riding them, and of course whether any protective headgear should be compulsory. Now, many people are talking about training. One writer said that even though trials have been going on for a year, more and more people are taking to the roads on scooters than ever before. There are no real guidelines or training on what to do when riding on a public road. And he suggests that something akin to a cycling proficiency test should be delivered. Now, unfortunately, of course, those courses are nearly always delivered to school-age kids. The very ones, of course, with the age-related bans, the age-related rules would in fact be banning from their use. Now, there are adult cycling classes, but I doubt that many older cyclists would actually take those. So I very much doubt whether e-step scooter classes would prove popular with many riders either. One of the other gaping holes is the lack of any word on how insurance would be handled, or if indeed it would be required by the user at all. Now, I have suggested in the past that whilst it's almost impossible to mandate for third-party insurance by users, what it could be achieved by is actually making a compulsory levy at the point of sale of each of these scooters, and then the resulting sort of pot of cash would be available to make necessary payouts to injured third parties. But whatever the rules, riders still need policing. Now, the trials, for example, have used apps to gain age verification and license entitlement, but in fact many police forces have actually reported that they've stopped riders who are unlicensed and underage on the scooters because they have either somehow spoofed the app, or a friend has provided the sort of the registration details for the underage rider. And frankly, there seems to be little will to crack down on the currently illegal e-scooter market. Which kind of brings the entire question full circle. Just creating more rules about what can be used and who can use it doesn't actually mean anybody will abide by them. And they're bringing in the illegal e-scooters. You have to tackle the manufacturer, the retailer, and not just the end user. You'll never stop individuals playing fast and loose with the rules, but ensuring that the scooters themselves are actually legal and meet design criteria for reasonably safe operation is a practical goal, in my opinion, if there is the will to police the market itself and ensure that illegal scooters do not end up in the supply chain. Okay, now that was quite a long little spiel on that. I've got Dave Kilty looking in. Hello, Dave. Good to see you. How's New Zealand? Paul Valsbury has actually come in. I might have guessed you would know, Paul. For the first draft international standard for helmets for step scooter riders has just been circulated. Excellent. Thank you very much. And Nigel's looked in again. Hi, Nigel. I haven't seen you for a little bit. Good to see you. Right, okay, so on with some more news stories. Motorcycle shop in South Wigston. If you're wondering where that is, it's apparently just outside Leicester. It was badly damaged on Friday night after a Mazda MX convertible went through the front window. Now, photos of the incident were widely shared on social media, and a Castledine Motorcycles owner actually wrote to thank everyone for their concern and to say we are all boarded up safely now and nothing was stolen. Leicestershire Police hadn't actually made any statement as of the time I wrote this particular little snippet, but reports do suggest that there were no significant injuries in the incident. How the crash happened is not entirely clear either. Maybe the driver was just trying to get a good look at the display. All right, don't forget, set a reminder, you can catch Elevenses going out normally live Wednesdays and Sundays at 11. Occasionally as a recorded show. I've been pretty busy with training over the last couple of weeks, plus a trip to Scotland for a bit of a break. And so I have had to run a few recorded shows just recently, but normally I do try to get them out live. If you can't see them live, you can catch up here on Facebook, obviously, or over on my YouTube channel, Survival Skills UK, which is generally the easiest way of finding an old show. And of course, you'll also find all my 60-second safety videos over there as well. New one went up last week. Now, last year, I reported on a fatal crash involving a motorcyclist who collided with a driver making a U-turn in the queue. The driver was actually charged fairly promptly by the police with dangerous driving, but Kawasaki were actually able to retrieve information stored on the bike's ECU that revealed that the motorcycle had actually been way over the speed limit in the couple of seconds before the crash. The implication was that the driver may not even have had the bike in sight because of a bend around the road at the time he commenced the maneuver, and so the dangerous driving charge was dropped. So that's the kind of information that is already stored in your modern machine, probably without you being aware of that. But with autonomous vehicles coming in, with vehicle to vehicle, V2V as it's called, and vehicle to everything, V2X technologies advancing year on year, more and more data is being collected on board, and potentially it's being transmitted back to the manufacturers. Now, sometimes this is actually to help develop the technology. Sometimes it just seems to be collected on the basis that it might turn up to be useful to that manufacturer. Now, it's not so hard to foresee a future where your start point, your track, your current position and speed are all being recorded and reported. And in theory, whilst these systems help to interconnect vehicles and reduce the chances of them colliding with each other, it's also easy to see how the storage, the use of this data and access to it, whether it's being sold on or it's being hacked, could become an issue. So several states in the US, including California, Virginia and Colorado, have already introduced new bills regulating the collection and use of such data. And now the Federation of European Motorcyclists Associations, FEMA, they have also been considering the privacy issues, and they are taking steps to work with governments on ways of regulating the collection and use of this data. Now, the comparison that FEMA has made is with the GDPR consent form that you must complete when you log into a new website using a browser, or how consent is needed when you buy a new smartphone to allow the manufacturer of the smartphone to actually collect data from your phone. FEMA recently sent a letter to the European Commission expressing that the same sort of standards should actually apply to vehicle data. FEMA explained the owner of the motorcycle must be in control of the data and be able to decide who gets access to it, which I thoroughly agree with. My guess is that the EU's response will actually be quite positive, since they are the people who came up with the GDPR rules in the first place. Right, don't forget, if you do enjoy the show, you can pop over to my coffee page and buy me a cuppa over there. All are welcomely received, gratefully received, I suppose I should say. That's better English, isn't it? And don't forget, it gives you access to hundreds of better biking articles. I've had some excellent feedback on those recently, by the way. I did have it written down somewhere, but I seem to have mislaid it. I'll going to try and remember that for the next show. Anyway, if you happen to live in the Netherlands, you'll discover that you're better protected than ever by a mandatory 1-year warranty if you're purchasing a used motorcycle. Now, this is all part of a European package of legislation that applies to cars, motorhomes, caravans, and even bicycles that are bought pre-loved. Now, European conformity rules already prescribed that a purchased product must do what you can reasonably expect it to do. But under the new EU legislation, second-hand dealers will now either have to describe a fault with a bike in the contract of sale, or pay for the repair or any breakdown that occurs during the 12 months of the warranty if it was not reflected in the contract. That reverses a situation that previously existed where the buyer has to prove a fault was pre-existing. Now, the rules don't apply to vehicles purchased from a private seller, by the way, but the buyer may legally assume that the vehicle will function according to the description. Now, it doesn't mean that the dealer cannot sell the bike on with issues that need fixing. For example, if the dealer says the brake pads need replacing, then the bike can be sold with worn pads, and it is down to the purchaser to replace those pads at their own time and expense. The buyer cannot come back later and claim that the issue should have been fixed when the pads go down to the metal. So these regulations are now in force in the Netherlands after they were approved by the House of Representatives and the Senate. I'm not sure of the state of play in other European countries. Now, as you probably know, since 2022 January, the new helmet standard ECE 2206 came into operation. Now, right at this very moment, both ECE 2206 and 2205 standards are running side by side. But from July this year, the new standard will be the only one accepted for new helmets in Europe and the UK. Presumably, old stock will still be allowed to be disposed of. Now, without going into too much detail, the new standard does introduce a bunch of new tests. It's considered to be a lot more rigorous than the older standard. One of the big changes is the addition of rotational impact tests, and another, and this one could actually see riders falling foul of the new rules, is that accessories previously fitted as aftermarket bolt-ons will be outlawed. So this includes things like my Bluetooth radios, which clip, like most of these devices, to the outside of the helmet. Action cameras, which you often see riders riding around with these bolted to their or glued to their helmets. Even the stick-on LED brake lights that I have featured recently on the show. These devices will still be legal to use, but only if they have been included in the testing process. So what that implies is that they will almost certainly have to be helmet specific. So in other words, it's likely the particular brand of helmet manufacturer will team up with another brand of Bluetooth radio, for example, and make sure that the Bluetooth radio fits neatly somehow into the helmet. Usually they go in a little sort of socket somewhere inside the shell. There's a little plastic cover or something that pops out, and the radio then fits neatly into the helmet. And presumably they'll be doing the same with sort of something like a GoPro camera. Now, right now, the market is kept reasonably honest by much cheaper Chinese competitors. My own Bluetooth bike-to-bike radios are Chinese made. They're a fraction of the price of the name brands that you'll find in shops. And in my experience, they are no worse a user experience. I've used the sort of expensive brand name ones, and I also have, as I say, these long range cheap Chinese ones, and spares in particular, because these things do get broken, are cheap and easily available. So I cannot see, if we get helmet specific items, that this is actually going to be good for the consumer. I can see a big price leap when you can only fit the helmet approved camera or communicator. Now, the answer, of course, would be to specify within the design of the helmet a sort of a standardized specification, sort of dimensions, sort of weight, impact, resistance of the item itself, all that kind of thing. So basically, anybody could build a compatible device, but I'm sure that's not going to happen, at least not straight away, when I suspect the Chinese will clone the sort of radios that you'll find will fit the new helmets. Of course, one thing to remember is that all older 2205 helmets will still be 100% legal to wear on the road, as is in fact this delightful old corker my dad used to wear in the early 1960s. Believe it or not, I can still go riding out wearing this thing. It does have the essential kite mark on the inside, on the liner, and believe it or not, I can still go out riding wearing this thing. Whether or not it's sensible is another matter, but I don't know, distinguished gentleman's ride or something perhaps. Anyway, moving on from that particular item of interest, word from the rumour mill is that Harley Davidson could be launching a brand new Revolution Max 275T engine powered Bronx model. Now, you might remember that the Bronx concept was revealed to us back in 2018, actually, and I'll just put this up on screen. I'll put it up sort of in biggish mode, because I think the actual bike is very, very attractive. It was revealed alongside the Pan American and the Sportster S, and the motor's a fairly advanced one. It's got things like variable valve timing in it, and liquid cooling, of course, and it was set to have been introduced with the Bronx. That was supposed to have been the model that came out first. But the Roadster, the first model from Harley Davidson, I could genuinely see myself owning. I really rather like the look of that bike. Turned out to be a victim of corporate restructuring, and the bike was shelved as Harley tried to get their cash flow back on track. Now, at the time, I said I doubted we'd seen the last of the model after all the development work that had gone into it. And it seems that Harley Davidson have now refiled the Bronx name tag in the US. Now, whether the looks will remain the same, we'll have to wait to find out. But quite frankly, given the cost of redesigning models like that, I honestly can't imagine they'll have changed very much. So look out for the Bronx coming soon. Now, I've got a couple of comments. Dave's asking me about the link to a report. I'll have a read of that, Dave, and get back to you on that. Paul says, did you say old stock will more than likely still be available after July? That is my understanding of the issue, Paul. Yes, just like the CE approved clothing is now a legal requirement, old stock, genuine old stock, can still be cleared out. Okay, Dave also says thanks about the previous comments about Shiny Side Up. Team really appreciate it. Well, Dave, thank you very much indeed. I love getting the opportunity to talk to you lot. I would much rather do it in person over in New Zealand, but until such time as we can do things like that again, I'm more than happy to support Shiny Side Up virtually. Right, okay, so last story of the day. I'm always amazed that the moto riders at the big cycle races actually manage to thread their way through the competitors at speed and in such close proximity with relatively few scares. As a former cycle race marshal myself, I'm under no illusions about how tough the job actually is, and actually dealing with the sort of professional circuit would be a quantum leap up again. But every now and again things do go wrong, and at stage 4 on the Giro d'Italia, riders to the rear of the race were actually caught up in a crash when a motorcycle appeared to lose control after hitting roadside furniture. Now, around 30 riders were affected by the incident, which happened with 160 kilometers left of a twisting stage in Sicily, so fairly near the beginning actually then. most of those riders were simply delayed by the crash, but a number of riders actually came down. And Roger Kluger of Lotto Soudal was one of the riders who hit the deck hard, and the cameras did actually catch him being checked over, but he was able to resume the stage, and fortunately no serious injuries were reported. Okay, good. So on to the final element of today's show, and that is a discussion point about when an overtaking bike collides with a car turning right, who is at fault. Now, I've just linked you to the video. I can't extract the video and show it here, but you'll have to follow the link, so I recommend you can do that later and have a look at it. But basically, the video is doing the rounds of the sort of news paper pages, billed as shocking dashcam footage on one of them, and said to be capturing the terrifying moment a motorcyclist was flung from his bike after a car made a right turn into an empty road. So what happened? Well, I did get hold of a still, which I can show you. If I can get it up on screen, there we go. So that basically is the sort of pretty much the moment of impact. The clip shows a rider overtaking on the right hand side of a vehicle which is turning right, and as a result of the impact, the rider and bike slid into that fence that you can see in the background. Now, the incident happened in Salford last December. The rider was said to be very lucky to be able to walk away from the crash, but did sustain a back injury. The driver of the car said he was shocked at the rider's lack of safety gear, and both vehicles sustained substantial damage. So, who is in the right and who is in the wrong? Now, Bryn Brooker, who's the head of road safety at Nextbase, the dashcam company that supplied the camera that caught the footage, said, "From my point of view, the motorcyclist was clearly travelling too fast and also attempting to pass the car on the right-hand side, which was not the correct side. That was why this incident has occurred. Looking at the video, it's clear that the driver was indicating and driving at a sensible speed." Well, is it the correct side? Well, that's one of those debatable points, isn't it? Because we are supposed to overtake on the right. We're not supposed to pass on the left unless the vehicle is turning right. So the question becomes, at what point did the vehicle start indicating? At what point did the motorcyclist become aware the car was turning? He also pointed out, of course, that it was extremely lucky there were no pedestrians around at the time. But I know from many arguments on this topic with people on the internet that many riders will point to guidance in the highway code in order to ladle blame on the driver. Now, it's fair enough for the UK's road code to say, watch out for cyclists, motorcyclists, pedestrians, and other road users, since any manoeuvre potentially impacts anyone else using the road. And I'd say it's reasonable enough too when the highway code offers further advice that states that before turning right, all road users, motorcyclists included incidentally, should check your mirrors and blind spot again to make sure you are not being overtaken, and then make the turn. And that's because a check could save such a collision with a rider or even another car that's actually already in the middle of a poorly made overtake. But unfortunately, many motorcyclists who are taken out in this kind of situation then rely entirely on the driver having looked for them. And so post-crash, they will argue they were in the right because the highway code says the driver should have checked his or her mirrors. Now, if you ask me, who should be double checking, I'll say it's the rider every time. And this is the reason. We are the ones putting ourselves in a vulnerable position. There is no obligation to overtake or filter past slower traffic. It may give us an advantage, but it is a choice. And I would say quite categorically that if we deliberately choose to put ourselves into a potentially vulnerable position, it's down to us to do everything we possibly can to prevent these kind of collisions. And I say this just a week or so after a relatively near miss when this very incident actually happened to me. Now, picture the scene. I was filtering towards traffic lights, down the outside of a stationary queue, and about 150 meters before the lights themselves, as you can tell, it's quite a long queue, there was a van positioned right out on the centre line, signalling to turn right at a junction, just like the one that you can see in the picture. Now, not surprisingly, I had absolutely zero plans to pass the van for the very reasons we've just seen. So I intended to wait for it to turn before carrying on, even though nothing was actually coming the other way at that very moment. And of course, because there was nothing coming the other way, the van did turn just as I came up close behind it, at which point the car sitting behind it, which had previously been right over on the left hand side of the lane and giving every impression that the driver was actually going straight ahead at the next set of lights, or this junction rather, did the flick the right indicator on and turn right simultaneously trick, just as I was beginning to filter past it. But unlike the rider in the video, I was traveling at a speed of probably not much more than a brisk walking pace, actually, and I was actually able to do a quick swerve to the right while braking at the same time, and that kept me out of the car's bodywork. So I was able to continue my journey to meet my trainees with no more than a slightly raised heartbeat, one deep breath, and a somewhat frustrated glance after the disappearing car. I don't think the driver was actually ever aware that I was there. Anyway, back to that video. The driver said he was thankful that he'd actually seen the motorcyclist, or was okay after the impact, but he said he was also very relieved to have got some footage of the incident, and that's because it turned out that the rider had actually borrowed the bike from a friend, allegedly, and turned out to be uninsured. And I would say, just to conclude, that it's remarkable how often flouting the rules goes hand in hand with reckless riding, which brings us full circle back to the e-step scooter story. Now, okay, just to round off, don't forget the next sites are being seen. Fine Detail event will be looking at in-depth elements of the Smidsy crash. So that goes out Wednesday, 1st of June at 8 o'clock. Tickets are now on sale at the usual place. The link is in the info pertaining to this video. Do come along. As I said, got some very, very good feedback on these. And even if you've seen the full presentation, this one will give you extra information because I go into detail on a particular part of the science. And last but not least, don't forget the next mini ride out, which is also going to be heading out towards the end of this month on Saturday morning, 10 o'clock meet, and we'll be going out from the Epping area to up into Essex for a nice couple of hours riding. Do come along, join me on that. You'd be more than welcome. There are a couple of places left at last count. And again, the link to that is up in the preamble to the show. Right, that is pretty much it for today. Thank you very much again for looking in. I do hope you've enjoyed today's show. Nice to do it live again. So don't forget, look in for the next one on Sunday when I'll be back with another episode of Elevenses. Till then, ride well and safe and stay shiny side up out there.